изысканные сорта чая пиквик с ароматом клубники.
1 килограмм 389 рублей.
Блядь! Блядь!
Трактор! Блядь! Блядь! Трактор!
По состоянию на вчерашний день, 26 апреля, на 4-м реакторе Чернобыльской атомной электростанции произошла потеря управления во время одного из испытаний на малой мощности. Это привело к взрыву, который разрушил здание и выбросил значительное количество радиации в окружающую атмосферу. После массовой эвакуации бассейны для подавления пара остались без присмотра, и давление в клапанах растет. Если не предпринять меры, давление продолжит увеличиваться, что приведет к вторичному паровому взрыву. Это выбросит неисправимое количество радиации в воздух из многочисленных коревых отложений. Отказ в удержании радиации станет концом для продолжения жизни на этом континенте. Персонал, отправленный для входа на объект, получит специальные инструкции через терминалы связи. Учтите, что у человека, который будет много говорить, могут быть некоторые эксцентричности.
Hello, dear viewer. To clarify, this equipment is not for the radiation, but the stench. I think a kick streamer walked through here, swiftly followed by Chris Hansen.
Today's topic, an emotion that is with us at every step of existence. Waking up in the morning, looking in the mirror, experiencing major changes in our life, intimacy with another. The common theme throughout? Fear. That nauseating realization that creeps up your spine, reminding you that when you wake up tomorrow, you have to go to work. Is there anything more terrifying than an employment rota? Yes, dear viewer, it's the fact that I have not made a dedicated Halloween video for the past 3 years. Well, technically 2, but I don't really count this one on the merit of it being cringe. But Smug, what distinguishes this from found footage? I'm glad you asked. Shut up. After the Felver Deck video was up and my toes had been thoroughly submerged in the waters of video creation, I searched for my next essay topic. This time, I would not be cut from experiencing spooky galore. I would find the perfect game to commence the horror gooning. Yet one logistical problem leered at me. Just what game did I want to talk about? Horror as a genre of media, let alone games, is often alienated from the fear response it wishes to inflict. Often what one finds to be inconsolably terrifying is found to be impossibly hilarious by another.
I can't even fucking imagine why you would have to do this.
We're experiencing an interesting inversion where mainstream horror is now a subgenre of comedy,
I can smell your nappy pussy.
while modern stand-up comedy is a horrific affair. Despite this already looming constraint, this was not the main limiting factor. There were some titles that caught my eye and made for potentially interesting discussion. A game recently played by Manly Badass Hero called No, I'm Not a Human appealed to me for its intriguing visual style and its use of the classic evil alien doppelgangers trope. Unfortunately, the game was only a demo, and with its full release set for 2025, I felt displeased at the thought of having to cover it twice. My mind moved to the next best thing. Hey, I've been meaning to make a Darkwood video since December of last year. Maybe this is finally my time. Before I'd even finished that thought, I'd already watched all of Pyrocynical's 8-hour comprehensive Darkwood recap and realized my inflation enthusiast alter ego had beat me to the proverbial punch. I waited for inspiration, biding my time with very useful and meaningful pursuits, but with the clock ticking and options dwindling, I was losing hope. Perhaps this was another defeat for me. It was time I surrender to fate, slip into something comfortable, and recline in a chair at the corner of the room whilst watching everyone else have their fun. But as I perused my library shelves one last time with a dejected expression, that hope appeared on the horizon. A game I had nary seen anyone talk about, and only a few even play. Liquidators. Liquidators is an atmospheric horror game developed by various student volunteers at the University of South Carolina that formed the studio Grey Unit, then published by Juggernaut Entertainment. It was created to depict the near-international cataclysm that the Chernobyl nuclear disaster could have been, and raise support for the many that helped contain the fallout. Playing from the perspective of a Soviet liquidator, you embark on a suicide mission to descend into the annals of the abandoned power plant and shut off the steam valves to prevent a catastrophic secondary explosion that would send radiation into the atmosphere. I remember playing through it in 2022, and, revisiting it 2 years down the line, I knew that this was my contribution to the YouTube altar. Rarely was I ever so deeply uneased by a horror game's premise and setting. It's overwhelmingly positive for pretty damn good reason. It's short, it's tense, and my god, is it genuinely brilliant considering the little it works with. I implore anyone watching who hasn't yet played this game, and isn't at risk of epileptic seizures, to go and do so. It should take no longer than 30 minutes to an hour, it's completely free, and will better improve your viewing experience by understanding what I'm talking about. Once this video is done, Liquidators will be completely spoiled for you, and there will be little incentive to go and play it afterwards. So sit back, dose up on some potassium iodide, and fasten your lead apron over your rubber form-fitting coffin, because I'm about to explain why Liquidators is so terrifying. Considering the brevity of this piece, it may be better to proceed through segments of the game chronologically and to use its keynote moments as examples to delve into the numerous opportunities Liquidators takes to really utilise the potential of a historical event setting and the medium of games. Where better to start than right at the beginning with the main menu and its tutorial. Liquidators has little fanfare. Commencing the game will immediately present you with a briefing cutscene in which your superior officer explains to you the basics of the situation. There are 6 steam valves that need to be turned, spread across an upper and lower section of the power plant tower, 4 on the top, 2 on the bottom. All of Europe rides on your success. On the terminal are detailed written instructions on how your equipment works, what you're looking for, and the general layout of the individual areas. One of your most essential pieces of kit, a radiological celebrity tenured to sit on the lower left corner of your screen, is your Geiger counter. Critical to this item is the meter on the right. At first it can be a little disorienting to figure out, but it's best described as an endurance meter, not a health bar. The top number indicates how much radioactive exposure the Liquidator can endure before falling unconscious. The bottom number is a measure of the radioactive dose the Liquidator has been hampered by. If the bottom number becomes equal to or greater than the top one, you're going to be taking quite the power nap. The instruction manual that explains this is a tad confusing in a way that I wager could be diegetic. What you're holding is a microcosm of invaluable technological utility that the Liquidator likely has only just seen for the first time, so the associated guide for its use would be equally as unfamiliar as it would be to the player who has only just been introduced to this mechanic. It makes you a little uneasy, considering the dire circumstances you'll be trusting it to guide you through. It makes you feel like you're out of your depth for this assignment where you can only rely upon yourself. From the starting point, Liquidators is already setting itself up very well. However, I fear some of those watching may already believe I'm being rather over the top about the equivalent of a Mario Party minigame tutorial, so let us move on before I am shot dead for the crime of being a pretentious video essayist. After the briefing and guide, you're given the option to select from the 3 different Liquidators. All these counterparts are the likenesses of the actual trio that descended into the facility for this specific task, but they've been granted an individual utility that helps suit them to different needs. Selecting one will bind you to them until victory or radioactive overdosing. Once selected, you advance into the corridor leading to the main chamber. You'll notice as you pass through it a lone ventilation shaft and a breaker switch. This may look like some environmental set dressing, but really this serves as a neat tutorial space to get your bearings with not just how each Liquidator's individual mechanic works, but also to understand the context cues for when and where they can be used. Valerie can crawl through vents that can serve as less treacherous paths to the valves. Alexei can make use of his very advanced electrical understanding to turn on a humble light switch. And Boris can walk. Opening the door to the next area, you're greeted with the atrium. To the right are some additional supplies like radiation pills and some extra flashlights for when yours inevitably breaks. Ahead is a sealed metal gate with 4 red lights shining from its face. Just before it, glowing red, a valve sits ready. This is also another tutorial. Where you're going, you'll be surrounded on all sides by varying devices, mechanisms, levers, and switches. It could be frustrating for the player to take some huge risks and endure significant radiation damage just to realize you were walking the wrong way the whole time. Placing one of the objectives in the game's hub that connects the individual chambers means that, without direct explanation, the player understands what they ought to be looking for. Turning the valve also turns one of the lights green on the metal gate. Before proceeding below, you'll need to find all 4 valves to get down there. Often when you think of student projects in game design, you think of Unity Store asset flips and a very lean mechanical arrangement with little focus. Great external limitations are placed on something made out of an academic obligation, especially financial. Here's some simple arithmetic. Good games cost time. Time is money. So pray tell, if you don't have money, are we surprised a game may look like this? God knows university students are already robbed of enough as it is.
Let me show you. Oh my god, this is how man are living, fam. Nah, what is going on, bruv? Is this what mans are on, fam? This is all cum in the tissues, blood.
So it was a pleasant surprise, going through Liquidators and seeing that, for a student project, there was an underlying solid structure to how the game would play from here on out. In less than 5 minutes, you understand the premise, the associated mechanics, and your objective. Not so bad so far. Yet, it's as you enter this atrium and turn the valve, you hear it. A metallic pulsing overhead, as if the failing spirit of a power plant inhales and exhales its last through the network of overhead pipes. The plumbing creaks and shakes to create an ominous and foreboding melody formed from the sounds of collapsed industry. Your Liquidator's breath labours under the duress of the approaching mission. As you pace across the entry hall to the concrete labyrinth, only your footsteps can be heard. Down in the decrepit tunnels, you are on your own. It only gets harder from this point on. In truth, you can tackle any of the 3 valves on the upper floor in any given order. It may be a suicide mission, but it's your suicide mission, and it's your god-given right to raw dog that shit in any sequence. With this in mind, I think the 3 different upper areas do vary in difficulty, and it would be best to tackle them in ascending order for dramatic effect. Through the left entryway, submerged beneath a lagoon of tepid water, the gate to the next valve sits across the dark chamber. Were it not for your flashlight, you'd be blind in here. The task presented is simple. Activate the generator to your right to open the gate and proceed up to turn the valve. However, they didn't send you down here because it was going to be that easy. The moment you activate the generator, the power surge initiates the circulatory system and water starts descending from above. In seconds, the chamber will be completely submerged and you will only last 10 seconds under the polluted body of water before you succumb. If you take the opportunity to look around before starting the generator, however, you can make use of some of the available amenities. If you're playing as Valerie, you can rush to the vent on the left and duck inside. This vent is a direct stretch of dry ground unimpeded by the water, meaning you can cover less ground faster. If you're playing as Alexei, you can approach the light switch on the right side and turn on the overhead lights. This will make navigating the room a lot easier when you need to start running. And Boris? Boris wades through the water, too masculine for effeminate industrial-grade bisexual lighting, or submissively bending over to crawl through the vents. This section is tense. It's a mad dash to cross the room and get through the gate before you drown. It's panic-eliciting to wade through the ever-rising tide and see how far you are from Sanctuary. What made it so haunting to play through was the excellent sound design and its command of atmosphere that will make its debut countless times throughout the game. Once the water starts flooding, an alarm sounds. To the observant in the audience, this cryptic message is clear. Start running, or you're gonna fucking die. But the alarm soon wanes, and a more terrifying sound picks up the slack in its place. The damaged circulatory system groans and growls as it dispenses water into the area. Metal piping clangs and clacks at a steady rhythm. These individual sounds contribute to what becomes a menacing track to serenade the impending doom of the rising waters. It sets your heart rate to a higher tempo and makes you sit straighter in your chair. Even coming back to play through this section again for more footage, I would sometimes get stuck on one of the overhead pipes and I'd be immediately seized by panic at the thought of the precious few seconds I just lost. Moving as fast as you can will still confront you with a climbing tide, and if you decided to hop through the vent, you'll feel your body seize at the sight of the water rising to meet you at the other end. This chamber takes no more than 30 seconds to traverse at a sprint, but during that time, the urgency conveyed through the discordant harmony of ambient sound and the horrifying visuals of being trapped in a flooded chamber whilst being weighed down by heavy lead apron inserts makes this brief encounter a very daunting experience. Surviving this ordeal and mounting the steps on the other side, you'll find the second valve. Turning it will reward you with 2 points of reprieve. The first is your superior officer. He'll praise your hard work and encourage you to remain steadfast as you proceed throughout the facility. He'll be there every step of the way to reassure you and monitor your success. He's sympathetic, supportive, and proud of you. His voice of authority, firm yet fair, gives the player a certainty you otherwise lack when trapped so far down below. You don't even know his name, but his repeated appearance during moments of success and his sincere reverence at your failures means you come to recognize him as a valuable companion. The second is, again, the music.
Okay, comrade. The pressure readings are leveling out. You bought us some time from another meltdown. Find your way to the next drainage valve.
When you turn a valve, a soft and ethereal whoosh will play to commemorate your success. It's a very fitting choice for this musical trill. The game's central conflict is you depressurizing the steam suppression system to prevent a second explosion. This noise fading into the still silence conveys a similar sense of depressurization, of fear dissipating. With how tense it makes the player feel, reaching the valve is also an unspoken indication of safety. You overcame the peril and its frightening consequences of failure. This is success. You are not going to be scared here. It's like both you and the game are sighing with relief together. For a game as short and small as this, so much can be said about this one decision regarding the noise that plays here. As you open the next door to escape from the flooded chamber, you are confronted with the next few steps. The second valve has been disengaged. You are still alive. There is hope for your country. Provided you live long enough to turn the next 4 valves, anyway. Once you've bested the submerged chamber, you'll find yourself in a long corridor. Each individual area will give you a shortcut connecting back to the hub and their counterpart sections, as well as give you an opportunity to replace any lights broken during your excursion. The provided convenience insulates the game from frustrations that could draw the player out from the enveloping isolation. The halls are also easy to navigate and direct you well from one section to the next, so the tension doesn't wane. Every step you take will lead you towards another part of your mission. In this case, it will lead you to the narrow passages of a second chamber. Within moments of walking through the door to the right, you are immediately confronted by a disconcerting abundance of corium deposits. These radioactive stalactites have formed as a result of molten nuclear material having burned free of its constraints and flowed through the pipes to form where they are. What you're seeing here is likely why it was of such grave importance that the steam suppression pools were drained and the valves depressurized. Corium is a chemical compound produced as a result of a nuclear meltdown, a reaction that involves a lot of water and steam. Water serves as a source of additional heat for corium. These corium stalactites are deposits that are slowly melting downward through the concrete towards the flooded steam suppression chambers beneath them. Upon contact, they would react with the trapped liquid bodies and summarily cause a steam explosion that would send even greater quantities of potent radiation into the air. As the written briefing earlier explains, having passed through the multiple levels of water pipes has dampened their ability to emit lethal radiation. However, these deposits are fatal on contact, and touching them will contribute a significant chunk of damage to your radiation meter. In this area, you're dealing with actual radioactive elements, and thusly your Geiger counter becomes an invaluable tool. Aiming the counter at the deposits directly will cause the device to frantically click in alarm. Passing close by these spires will cause the dots around the glass screen to flash an alarm. These serve as a proximity warning and will point in the direction of where the radiation emitter is. Of course, this is a useless convenience. You can see where the spires are. They emit medium levels of ambient radiation, which does steadily tick up your radiation counter, but that would take a very long time to ever become a concern. So far, the second area seems a lot easier than the first to rush for an exit. That is, however, until you proceed down the corridor into the second area. The instructions at the beginning mention an immense atmospheric radiation due to the emission of smoke particles, and how you should be wary of it messing with your equipment. This leads to a moment of absolute genius design for the second area. It's filled with pillars of cooling corium deposits that separate the player from the glowing red light across the room that marks the valve's location. Crossing the door's threshold will cause the lights to flicker. The player, who likely has the shared human experience of understanding lights are not supposed to try and throw you into a wild breakdancing fit, will naturally put it away to hopefully save it from breaking. Upon doing so, the player is immediately consumed by darkness, and the realization soon dawns on them that it is absolutely impossible to see where they are supposed to be going. On my first playthrough, you can see me making this exact realization and hesitating to enter. It's petrifying to proceed, especially when the last time the light was shining, you could see just how narrow the paths were between the deposits.
Ooh, that's kind of small.
Once the player has worked up the courage to venture inside and endure the anxiety of their flickering light, they'll find that they can make significant headway despite the interference. Crossing the room and slipping through gaps between deposits, you'll descend onto the lower platform and glimpse just how much farther you have to go before... This event is bound to a set point. When I walk or sprint through the first platform, the light always dies halfway through. This may not seem like much, the scene is already quite horrifying, but having it break halfway through as opposed to right at the start is a very deliberate and effective choice. If the light breaks the moment you cross the threshold, you'd be startled and likely feel the same terror at the thought of what's ahead, but also the moment would pass quite fast. You probably wouldn't even have much chance to acknowledge just what waits for you ahead before it goes off. Having it flicker as you enter lets you know what you're up against, and consequently, what you ought to be scared of. Instead of playing their cards right away, it lets the tension build just a moment longer to truly get you. But more crucially than this, if it broke near the entrance where it's well lit, there's every chance the player would simply run away. The opportunity for egress means they can better reckon with what's ahead and dampen how much it's going to scare them. But it doesn't break at the door. It breaks halfway through your stroll into the abyssal darkness. In my Lethal Company video, I spoke about how the objective of the game means that you can't just run away at your first encounter. Running puts you in a position of power to disengage from what's scaring you. Watch as I turn around to do exactly that and realize I can't. This menacing music, the sound of energy pulsating through the air, like the radiation slowly cooking you alive, underscores a dawning realization. Not only are you stranded in the dark, not only can you not flee, but all you have left is your Geiger counter to guide you. Unbeknownst to the player, the first part of this section was a secret tutorial. To secure the third valve, the player needs to navigate in the dark around hazards that are fatal upon contact. What makes this especially scary is how, regardless of which liquidator you've just picked, you cannot avoid this encounter. Even if there is a secret light switch or vent lurking on the other side, the danger you'll have to face just to get there is too much for it to be an efficient use of time, when the high ambient radiation is driving your radiation count higher and higher by the second. No matter the skill set of your character, all of them have to rely on the Geiger counter's proximity alarm to guide them. I'd forgotten how this section went, and, as evident in the footage, it blindsided me when I realized how things were going to proceed. The repetitive clicking of a mechanism starts to play throughout the thrumming dread of the music, played to a tempo and pitch that evokes this sense of deep yet frenzied thinking. It creates tension in how it suggests hope during ceaseless despair. There is a way out, but you're not going to find it if you don't stop crying and start moving. If you heed the counter's warnings and navigate the maze successfully, you'll be rewarded with another bout of safety. Never before have I felt so relieved to hear this sound play.
You're doing great, comrade. We're almost there. Keep doing what you're doing. You might make it out of this alive.
As quickly as relief comes, it very soon fades. Drowned out by the maddened clicking and beeping of the Geiger counter, the next trial awaiting the player is far more harrowing in its lethality. After completing the water chamber, a tunnel will have opened underground. It leads you to a ladder that brings you back to the atrium, but if you hang a right and proceed along the corridor, you'll be brought into contact with one of the most infamous radioactive hazards in history, the elephant's foot. The elephant's foot is a large mass of radioactive corium, which is individually composed of many different materials like molten concrete, uranium, zirconium, and so on. During the disaster, this scorching mass of hatred burned its way out of a reactor enclosure and through reinforced concrete before coming to a stop in a nearby maintenance room. Notes from the written briefing instructions describe how others who have looked at it directly fell unconscious and are now lying in critical condition. With the immense amounts of gamma radiation it emits, stopped only by thick concrete, cameras and other devices were destroyed when in its presence. A clear picture is created before you're even near it. The elephant's foot is fouler than even the most wretched of Gmod public TTT players. A specific example given for a justified reason. I rolled up to a server with some pals, looking forward to an evening of being mercilessly killed for no apparent reason by strangers. Poop whistle. Oh shit. And delighted in sharing my spray on the walls of the map. Within seconds I was shot dead by an admin, gagged, and denied the privilege of using sprays ever again.
Your spray has been auto-blocked.
My spray's been auto-blocked? I think it's an incredible image I'd love to show you. Oh, man. Society is hurtling on this downward slope towards total collapse, and I'm very happy to scapegoat these specific people for it. Domain expansion, Republican social policy. No doubt by now you've gotten the point, but it's only as you cross the threshold, not even in sight of the accursed abomination, that your light shatters. A familiar thrumming dread plays as it radiates through the open spaces, but interceding it, the sound of bubbling magma from the center of the room. Step out into the open for even a fraction of a second, and your senses will be assaulted. Your vision blurs, and the shriek of a violin assails your ears. Your Geiger counter's proximity alarm beeps red on all sides. For even the briefest moment of exposure, your radiation count skyrockets. Being in its line of sight completely overwhelms you with potent and debilitating radiation that your equipment cannot even begin to measure. The challenge this third section presents is as simple as the others, and similarly, the terror of reckoning with it is not lost on the player. The fourth valve sits on the opposite side of the room. Unfortunately, the elephant's foot guards it, and a straight shot across the chamber will not end well. Using the many concrete walls around you, you need to forge a path through the treacherous chamber to circumvent the elephant's foot's radioactive wrath and turn the valve. Depending on who you've chosen, this area will either be surprisingly easy or nauseatingly difficult. With Valerie, you can sneak around the right side and slip into this vent shaft to then bypass the elephant's foot and slip through to the valve. Alexei and Boris are not capable of his rat-like scurrying, so have a much harder time getting through here. There is a light switch for Alexei in a nearby room, but the area already seems rather well lit, so serves little purpose for progress. Sticking to the left side will lead you to a ladder that takes you to this walkway. These pieces of sheet metal propped against the railing would make one think they know what to do, rush between each of them and stop to minimize their radiation intake. This is a tacit lie of a liberal agenda, along with pesky myths such as Elon Musk's supposed intelligence and KSI's supposed musical talent. These will shield you by crouching next to them, but you'll suffer through too much exposure to make it to the other side. Even Boris's fortitude in wide walking cannot best this foe. Sticking to the right and moving for the ladder behind the radioactive mass will bring you to victory. I can't really praise the game for the elephant foot's design or concept. In a game where you're trying to realistically depict the horror of Chernobyl, something so central to its disaster being involved is practically a historian's due diligence. Applying this to a game's format, however, is tricky. You're not just rendering it in a specific graphical style, you're embedding it as an element of gameplay which the player will directly interact with. How can you make a blob of graphical textures feel like an adversary, not just an obstacle? I think what best sells the illusion that the elephant's foot is an entity rather than just an idle hazard is its premise. The fact it only hurts you when you're in its field of vision bestows this obstacle a sense of agency. Only living things are capable of vision, let alone using it to then violently act upon it, so when this immobile sentry beams you with all its vitriolic disdain the moment you break cover, you feel like you're avoiding a living monster. Remind yourself of what it was like in the last section. You could stand right next to a corium deposit and your Geiger counter was the only thing to react. Even touching one doesn't elicit much reaction. The disparity between this and the reaction to the elephant's foot, where your character is so encumbered by radiation they can't see and become deafened by its horrifying screech, vaguely quantifies the many menacing magnitudes of power this thing is wielding. The other sections had you contend with obstacles, but in this chamber, there's a greater sense of adversity to match the risk. It feels like you are trapped in there with something that wants you dead. This is what makes Liquidators so curious as an atmospheric horror game. You are completely alone in a facility, accompanied only by the constant of your breathing until you are no longer alive to hear it. This is a prime setting to introduce a stalking predatorial monster like an axe-wielding killer or a, I don't know, towering, sexy xenomorph, yet somehow, it does even better in its absence. In reality, the elephant's foot does not bear the conscious will to want to do you harm. The adversity it exudes makes it feel alive, plays off a primal fear of something higher in the food chain lurking nearby, but really it's a mass of churning fissile radioactive material created by human error. Perhaps what makes it so scary is because this truly exists in our world as a manifestation of what people refer to as the invisible monster, that being radiation. The horror of this game is environmental because the hazards to not just you but the world beyond are environmental, and the ambient music works to convey their lethality. Having Boris collapse like the elephant foot knocked him unconscious in Punch-Out and being able to then rescue him is terrifying because I know the game is very deliberately understating the effects of radiation poisoning for the sake of a gameplay system. This section is so engrossing in the fear it creates and how brutally it depicts the effects of radiation, but even still, it does not hold a candle to what the invisible monster can actually do to you. Wendigoon's video on the painful demise of a Japanese nuclear worker called Hisashi was caused by being briefly exposed to a tub of radioactive uranium as it reached criticality. I don't think I can even recount what happened to him for YouTube reasons, but what I will say is the hospital practically had him suspended like this at one point, and it was coming out of both ends. Due to the difficulty of this encounter in comparison to the others, it's very likely this will be your first time the Liquidator gets knocked out. This introduces you to the neat little mechanic that is rescuing. Having 3 Liquidators at your disposal translates into having 3 tries available before you fail this critical operation. However, returning to the previous zone, you'll find your fallen comrade in the same position. Depending on the risk you face in that moment, you can make the decision to gamble your second life on retrieving your ally and reviving them at the hub area station. This will give you back that Liquidator to use, although they will retain all the permanent health damage that they sustained prior. Your mistakes will have consequences, and while you can redeem them somewhat, you are always going to be set back for them. Once you've selected a Liquidator, you're stuck with them, and can't switch to another until the current one is sacrificed. I uninstalled the game and reinstalled it because I wanted to restart my run, just to find that it retained my progress and I had to continue. The point of this being mentioned here is that your actions against the elephant's foot have consequences, and, similar to the Corium Maze, the game has been designed so you can't just run away when things get too much for you, in the same way the real people who had to do this couldn't just turn around and go back. If you wish to experience Liquidators, you have to push through until victory or death. Once the valve has been turned, you can make your swift escape to the upper walkways and sprint away from the grasp of the monstrosity below. Returning to the hub will give you the opportunity to use medical kits to lower your radiation counter, replace your flashlight, and then notice the gate to the lower level has been opened. The end is in sight. Endure the terror of one last bout, and you'll have helped prevent a nuclear disaster. This is a big moment. Passing through the gates and proceeding down along the corridor, your rapid footsteps are complemented by the sighs and exhales of steam flowing through the pipes unimpeded. You scale down a set of rusting scaffolds as you prepare for the final gauntlet. This final zone is tranquil, almost soothing in how inactive it is. The invisible monster is not here to harry you. Subliminally, the game is telling you that the elephant's foot is the worst you'll face from here on out. However, that does not mean what is up ahead will be so easy. Before you, the holy grail of your mission, the steam suppression system sits completely submerged in water. On the other side of the room, the light of a valve flashes with indignance. You cannot swim across. The weight of your gear and the radioactive pollutants dissolved in the water won't let you, so you'll have to bridge your way to the other side. The keen-eyed among you will see that there are no construction supplies left to assist you on this task, nor any hard-bodied workers to give you some well-needed reprieve, and so you realise that the pipes will have to serve as an alternative path. Throughout the game, the player has seen numerous testaments to the structural stability of the power plant's plumbing, namely how a nuclear detonation can very easily rupture metal, and a downward glance into the depths of a submerged chamber shows the consequence of poor footing. If a pipe collapses, and you're on it, you're going to take a very deep dive. It's not impossible to rush your way back to the stairs and resurface, but there is greater consequence in failing to recuperate. If a Liquidator passes out down there, recovering them will be nigh impossible. Your lives cannot be so easily restored. I remember how back when I first played this section, I had lost Boris and Alexei to the elephant's foot upstairs on the walkway of doom. Likely this is the same situation for many other players. From a gameplay perspective, this is a very harrowing gambit, and failure will punish you with all the stress and panic horror games usually inflict upon you as you flounder in the water before drowning. Another very good use of this environmental ambient to increase the tension is that one of the water tanks starts thumping to the rhythm of a steady heartbeat. It is clearly a deliberate decision, because it only starts after you rush across the first pipe and it falls behind you. It serenades the adrenaline spike in a player from such a close call, which it anticipates to great effect. When I crossed the second pipe and felt it collapse underneath me just as I got across, urged to move fast by the loud creaking below, I took a moment just to look back at how close I had been to losing. Turning the fifth valve rewards you with that soothing noise of relief, but you're not done yet. The water has been lowered, but it's still holding steady halfway down. The second valve, partially submerged, lies below on a second layer of pipe walkways. To access it and succeed, you'll likely need to drop onto the collapsed pipes from before and use them to then descend onto the platforms below. This can be quite daunting, considering you'll have to look down to keep track of where you're jumping to, which means you're actively being reminded of what's waiting for you if you miss. With that metallic heartbeat still in your ears, you clear a path towards the left side of a room and, with a click of a button, dispel all the fear you had shouldered until this very point.
You did it! You crazy son of a bitch! You actually did it! Come out now! Come out now!
I find it fitting that the heartbeat effect persists here. Your body has been so strained by this experience that, even while acknowledging your success and dashing back up to the freedom of the surface, it takes time for it to depressurize itself. The elevator returns you to the above corridor, and, with the exit in sight, you flee the treacherous industrial caverns and escape from this nuclear asylum, alive to tell the tale. Footage of the workers celebrating and marking their names on the silos of a facility follows as the game offers a vote of thanks to the 3 men who braved the radioactive innards of a facility, as well as shows that this trio was but a smaller part of a bigger 600,000 strong collective. The importance of their actions is not to be understated, nor how horrible what they faced was, but their success was merely one of the initial steps taken in a gargantuan undertaking that was radioactive cleanup. Behind this tragedy, there is an undeniable human aspect that the game has gone to great lengths to depict in a reverent manner. This is quite apparent with your superior officer's inclusion in the game, which is integral to the purpose of Liquidators' existence. Paying respect to the human cost. As stated before, your superior officer makes sparing contact of you through your radio to track your progress. He doesn't only speak with you in an official capacity though, but as a supportive human being. If a liquidator falls unconscious and you select the next one to go in, he'll say the following.
We lost contact with him. As much as I regret it, High Command recommends not going after him. But as your superior, I allow you to do so if you have the opportunity. We might be able to treat him at the hub area if you drag him there. The choice is up to you.
Of course, there is a gameplay incentive to saving incapacitated liquidators, but the superior officer's words are very sympathetic and understanding of the situation you're in. He neither forces you to risk your life correcting the brazen mistakes of another, nor does he forbid you from doing so. It's apparent in his tone that the thought of you passing does dismay him. Whenever you select a new liquidator and proceed inside, he'll call you to connect you with family. When playing as Valerie, this will happen.
Valerie, your father's on the line. He was insistent on having a quick word with you. Valerie, I wanted to say that I'm very proud of you. I'm honored to have you as my son. The state does not deserve you.
When playing as Alexei, this will happen.
Alexei, I know this may not be a good time, but your wife wanted to speak with you. She's on the radio now.
Alexei, I didn't want to distract you. I just wanted to hear your breathing one more time. I miss you.
And when playing as the formidable Boris, this saddening clip will play.
Boris, we know you lost your family, and we cannot imagine what you've gone through since. But we are here, and we will remain with you the whole way, to the end of the line.
Of all these three, I think Boris's sticks out the most to me. Having Valerie's father and Alexei's wife talk to the player is employed for the purpose of reminding the player that there is, and was during the real disaster, a wider world at stake. You'll only ever see the metal and concrete confines of this sprawling tomb, but this serves to, in your head, illuminate the existence of life beyond it, to motivate you to press on so the world does not become as barren as the halls you navigate through. But with Boris's, the superior officer doesn't know him. He's a stranger. So when he talked about sticking with him until the end of the line, the sorrow he shows to how Boris doesn't have any family to call him, it's quite touching and heartfelt. Standing still for 2 minutes, the superior officer will radio you to say this.
Are you okay? We noticed that you haven't moved for some time. If you're afraid, know that it's okay. Because we all are. We're relying on you. Good luck.
The sincerity in his voice, the shared fear you both have knowing what's ahead, makes his words of comfort mean so much more. The capacity mankind has to empathize with their fellow people, the unity tragedy brings between strangers, is pretty moving and played to great effect throughout the game. It's compounded by the rising hope in a superior officer's voice as you proceed, each valve turned another incremental increase in the faith your people have in you. When you get to the end of the game and turn that last valve, he is elated. Considering how different he sounds from the beginning, where he speaks in a level and firm tone, it brings a surge of happiness and relief upon the player. His insistence for you to leave immediately so you can be congratulated can be equally as interpreted as concern. The job you needed to do is done, so the radioactive exposure you're continuing to endure by being inside is an unnecessary attempt on your life. For a nameless presence who was likely just one of the development volunteers talking, it is a surprisingly noteworthy one. Which is why I think this is what makes Liquidators so terrifying. I say this not because of the raging misanthropy sourced from the hellish pits of retail work, where talking back to a rude customer is treated with the same severity as if you have revealed you dabble in jihadist clothing brands, but because I think it gives weight to the consequence of failure in the game. It's no doubt apparent Liquidators is a game you play through once. A lot of the nail-biting tension it creates comes from how unprepared the player is for what they're unknowingly walking into, such as the ambush in the Corium Maze. Once you know which pipes will fall during the last section, which honestly isn't that hard to see anyway, and where you need to run during the elephant foot encounter, only the lurking unease of the atmosphere remains. Contrast my apprehensive and hesitant first approach here with the brazen confidence shown here. Boris cares not for the natural decay of life, there are valves that need turning. So really, it's only likely you'll be faced with the weight of failure during your first attempt, likely during the elephant foot encounter. With all three Liquidators down for the count, the people they contemplated sacrificing themselves for are left in peril. Unlike our reality in which these heroes helped contain Chernobyl, this one caves to the fearsome might of radioactive entropy with a dire human cost. So, dear viewer, care to peer behind the veil and glimpse our alternate reality? Let's not get wires needlessly crossed here. I don't think Liquidators is the Disco Elysium of horror games, nor do I think it's redefined the genre. It ultimately aims to adhere to what went on at Chernobyl, and consequently means quite a few of the design decisions are determined not by savvy creative taste, but because it needs to be accurate. A documentary isn't often praised for its story, because, well, it didn't make the story, just how Liquidators didn't create this scenario or ending. If this game was fictitious, the game over sequence wouldn't be nearly as harrowing as it is. Knowing that a world where Europe is irreparably irradiated, killing tens of millions and leaving it barren for upwards of 20 millennia, only hits so hard because it really could have been ours at one point. But how a documentary tells the story, the narration, the presentation, the quality of the employed effects, is worthy of comment. Liquidators as a game set out to do one thing: convey the horrible experiences of this select trio during a nuclear disaster to greater accrue thanks and appreciation for the many who now are encumbered with health complications and disabilities as a result of radioactive exposure in Chernobyl. It aims to faithfully and respectfully present the happenings of this trio's excursions at the site of a nuclear disaster, and that, to me, is why it ends up being so fear-inducing. There was no need to play things up to milk YouTuber reactions. By capturing the true essence of this disaster, it naturally brought the horror, the reality of it, into disconcerting focus for the audience. Instead of hedging bets on trying to be scary, distorting and warping the tale with cliched tropes as part of a fear factor that has worn its cheap price tag on its sleeve for years now, it accurately portrays the lethal potential of science's most terrifying natural oddity. An entity that destroys life not through malice or willpower or needing to feed itself, but because that is all it is capable of doing. An invisible monster that continues to exist long after we close the game and turn off the screen. Commanding the atmosphere with such great authority gives Liquidators fearsome presence on the monitor. Its gameplay moments are simple enough to stop you from being too frustrated to feel the fear it wants you to, but not so simple that you are without adversity. The tension accelerates skyward and then slopes downward with an almost impeccable timing. Hope keeps you moving forward, but fear keeps you thinking of turning back. Decisions matter, and, for at least your first time through, being the one to make them saddles you with an unwieldy responsibility for the world as you know it. Grey Unit managed to apply a sensitive historical tragedy to the medium of games, so, through this indirect, frightening experience, we can come to learn just a fraction of the perils many people like Boris Baranov, Alexei Ananenko, and Valery Bespalov experienced. Liquidators undoubtedly succeeds at bringing attention to the exploits of those who have been forgotten, and exemplifies the heroism of so many at Chernobyl by showing the horror of what they were brave in the face of. For all of this is why Liquidators is so terrifying.